Chapter 6, Developing Medical and Fitness Standards. Now this chapter focuses on medical and fitness standards as they relate to fire and emergency responders. What is being done to improve the health and fitness of firefighters and how our bodies use energy and react to firefighting and other emergencies, and what is necessary for the fire and emergency responder to do their job safely and efficiently. Our objectives: discuss what national medical and physical fitness standards are and their relevance to the fire and emergency responder. Explain why improving the health and wellness and fitness of emergency responders is important. List the reasons heat dissipation is difficult for firefighters. Explain maximum heart rate and the influences that emergency response have on it. Describe the importance of a responder's ability to use oxygen, and list the components of a firefighter's Criterion Test, such as the Cpap. Describe the differences between wellness and fit for duty. Identify the NFPA standard developed for medical and fitness application. And explain the application of maintenance versus repair when discussing health. Okay, so before we get rolling, I want to put a question to you and ask you this. What is the most valuable piece of equipment the fire department has? And undoubtedly, to me, one of the most important and vital pieces of equipment that we have is the firefighter themselves. So why is it that departments will spend money for maintenance and upkeep of fire engines, hoses, nozzles, extrication tools, and things of that nature, but spend very little on maintenance and upkeep of their most valuable resource? Now, no aspect of a culture change for safety is as daunting as implementing a national medical and fitness standard for the fire service. Now, the reason why implementing the standards is challenging is as follows. Few other industries have medical or fitness standards to use for comparison. Opinions of health and physical fitness vary widely. And emergency responders have shift schedules that place them in a disadvantaged position compared to the general public. So if we look at the traditional day, it can be very hard for firefighters to eat right. You got a busy day, you're eating fast food, you're on the run, especially if you're on an ambulance. The stress of shift work and serious calls affect your blood pressure and digestion. It can be hard to stick to an exercise regime. Of course, we work weekends, you attend extra classes, and some even teach. So where do we find time? And there's a lot of arguments here. Now, what if we have firefighters work out on duty instead of an hour or so a day? Is it going to be up to such a point that they expend all their energy, so when they do have a fire, they're going to be spent and not worth a darn and maybe get hurt or injured? So just a few challenges, to say the least. So what we really need is a culture change when we start looking at physical fitness in terms of the firehouse. A lot of times when you go to a firehouse, you see a lot of fried foods and unhealthy habits. And a lot of recruit classes are starting to address this. We get in recruit school, we have them exercise, work out, jog, we get them in shape, and then, we send folks out to the station, and the standard joke is you haven't made shift weight yet, so don't order your uniforms, because after having, shift life where it can be maybe more of a sedentary lifestyle, you're going to put on some pounds. So what we need is a culture change. So if the doctor goes to you and says, hey, you need to lose 20 pounds and your cholesterol is high, then yeah, we are unhealthy. So what do you tend to do when the doctor says that? Do you go on a diet? Do you adjust your eating habits? What do you do to take care of yourself? And as an employer or an officer in charge of people, what do you do to help promote healthy living within your fire station? Although talk of improving health and fitness is nothing new to emergency responder providers, there are signs that it is now becoming a bigger priority. As a result of the unacceptable number of line of duty deaths every year, different groups have come together to ensure the health and fitness standards that are developed that apply to what we really do. So we have those traditional organizations like the National Volunteer Fire Council, the International Association of Firefighters, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and of course even NFPA. The Fire Service Joint Labor Management Wellness Fitness Initiative was created by IAFF and IAFC to kind of help spearhead this. And in 2003, the National Volunteer Firefighter Council created the Heart Healthy Firefighter Program to improve health and fitness and nutrition of all emergency responders. So let's look at some of the statistics. According to NFPA, approximately one half of the firefighters who die in the line of duty in 2009 died as a result of stress or overexertion, and that's usually in the form of a heart attack or a stroke. Now, NFPA 1583 is the standard on health-related fitness programs for firefighters, explains that firefighters need to be medically and physically fit in order to perform the required task of the job. Until recently, a serious problem for firefighter health and fitness has been that we were working off theories instead of facts. Although there were some research projects that studied the effects of firefighting in the human body, many were from small groups under simulated circumstances. And in 2008, Indiana University and the Indianapolis Fire Department released the results of a research project. Now, if a person has a heart disease, statistics shows he or she probably will die as a result of it. However, firefighters with the same condition will die from a heart attack or a stroke much sooner. University of Maryland and Maryland Fire Rescue Institute conducted a study that effects of live fire training, and the conclusion basically came out that firefighters take a significant toll on the body, and health and fitness are their best defense. And there's a lot of studies out there, and there was one quite recently that was showed that firefighters are at greater risk for clots or strokes, of course heart attacks, because when you go into a fire, we all know the heat that is involved, and your body can't really cool itself because of our protective gear, and you become extremely dehydrated. So you're losing that plasma. So what's left is your hemoglobin and your red blood cells, and those are already sticky per se, because when you scratch yourself and you begin to bleed, the red blood cells have that fibrous tissue that bonds together and creates scabs. Well, when you start removing that fluid around them, all you have are these sticky red blood cells, and they start clumping together. And as you may or may not know, when they clump together, they form a clot, and if that clot gets lodged in a small artery or a vessel that feeds the brain or the heart, now you have a stroke or quite possibly a heart attack. So again, the study was just showing how prone, through medical testing, they took blood samples from firefighters prior to going into a structure fire, and then blood samples coming out, and they started looking at the differences and noticing this alarming trend with firefighters in terms of being more susceptible to, of course, blood clots. So let's go a little more in depth on the metabolism and the makeup of the body and what firefighters are experiencing and what's going on internally so we can have a better idea of how we can fix the problem. Now, your body needs oxygen and sugar or fuel. Those are the two basic building blocks that provide energy for cells. And without either one of those, then the cell will die. And of course, if the cell dies, then the organ dies. And of course, the tissue and eventually the organism itself. So we need to look at how we generate this energy to work as a machine. Now, gasoline and diesel engines use a combination of fuel and oxygen to produce energy. Regulating the amount of fuel or oxygen to the engine directly affects the energy output. So if we apply this to the human body, essentially, less oxygen equals less power, which equals less speed for the mechanical engine, but that's pretty much on par with the human body. Now, the human needs oxygen to run, and the same rules apply. Insufficient oxygen means insufficient endurance. This is why one of the first signs of a cardiovascular problem is shortness of breath. It's your body's way of trying to compensate for that lack of oxygen. So the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system work hand in hand and have a direct effect on each other. The cellular process of using oxygen and glucose or sugar to create energy is referred to, of course, metabolism. So when you drag a 2.5-inch hand line to the river structure with a portable deck gun in full gear, you are operating at a high metabolic rate because you need a lot of energy to do that work. And your body needs more oxygen to do the work. So to compensate, your body says, hey, we need more energy. We got to crank it up. So the heart rate increases so it can get the oxygen to the cells where it's needed. And of course, your breathing increases because you're going to need more oxygen to do the job. The three components responsible for the ability to do physical work are essentially a healthy pump, meaning the heart, to get the oxygen and sugar to the cells, adequate sized pipes to get the blood to where it needs to go, and the ability for the oxygen to load and unload out of the blood. So, you get the oxygen come in, it gets on the cell, the carbon dioxide gets out and gets exhaled, and of course everything goes round and round. Now, the heart is one of the strongest muscles. The harder it works, the more oxygen it needs. And of course, you have to look at high blood pressure, and overweight makes the heart work even harder because it requires more oxygen. Now, congestive heart failure can be caused by hypertension and can lead to symptoms such as shortness of breath and fluid in the lungs, and that's a side note. Of course, like any other muscle, the more you work a muscle or overwork it, the bigger it gets. So it can become enlarged. And of course, an enlarged heart can lead to other significant medical problems. And when you look at the heart, we can kind of look at it like a machine or an engine. So your heart has several components and safety systems that make it pump efficiently and effectively. First, the throttle. And again, that's your heart rate. You need more energy, you need more gas, the heart is going to kick up. Of course, we need pressure. In order for pressure to build, you need transfer valves. And when we're looking at our circulatory system, we have pressure to pressurize the arteries. And of course, veins have the little like check valves, if you will, to keep the blood flowing in one direction. So when we have an adequate blood pressure, you have that discharge pressure that keeps the system moving round and round. And of course, it interfaces with the lungs, and the oxygen comes on and off, and of course, the glucose gets circulated. Now, like any engine, it needs to be kept from overheating. So your auxiliary cooler here is sweating. So that's the way to help things cool down. So if we start looking at, again, firefighting, our cooling system is hampered because your body's not able to cool itself effectively just due to the heat and, of course, our protective gear. Of course, finally, the very fact that you're excited has a huge effect on your heart rate. There are studies that show when public safety individuals are just sitting around at the station resting per se in the recliner, their heart rate is normally higher than when they're off duty. And they equate that to this constant adrenaline rush that's going on, that your body's in the state of preparedness or readiness because at any given moment the tones could drop. And then when the tones drop, that adrenaline gets released more into the body and the heart rates go up even faster. And this kind of goes into that fight or flight or the sympathetic nervous system. So, hey, we got to get ready. Your body's getting mentally prepared, and you have adrenaline getting dumped in the body and everything speeding up, getting ready to do the work. Of course, that also is putting a taxation on the system. It's like having an engine that's, getting revved up already, and then you slam the gas. So being mentally prepared for duty is one of the Initiative 13, is as important as being physically prepared. Initiative 6 and the sympathetic nervous system had the two stitched together. Now, your parasympathetic is the brake. The sympathetic is the gas, and again, that's the fight or flight, and the parasympathetic is the brake, or rest and restore. So, as hormones that were dumped in the system from the sympathetic response are metabolized or excreted, the body can take time to complete vital tasks such as digestive, food, healing, and resting. So, all those vital things that are going on get put on hold when you're in that fight or flight mode. Now, all energy consumption ends in the heart from a television that's turned on to your vehicle tires on the turnpike, so essentially thermodynamics. Now, the body metabolism is no different than this. Through metabolism and increased work, our bodies continue to build heat. And when working in the confines of PPE, it's going to get miserable. And with no immediate way to cool and slow down that pump, we must rely on prehydration and rehab. And that is a big thing. Most Americans walk around dehydrated on a daily basis. Now, part of a diverse workout regimen should include an occasional session in full gear and air pack or a weighted vest and sweatshirts to simulate the diminished ability to lose heat as you exercise. And again, that's a way to prepare your body for the rigors of the environment we face when fighting fire. So let's look at the pipes. The next component to being physically enabled to complete the task in the fire scene is having adequate sized pipes to move the blood, thus carrying oxygen to the organs where it's needed. And it's kind of similar like water mains, feeding hydrants. The larger the water main, the more water you're going to get. Same concept applies with your blood vessels. Now, blood pressure is an easy way to gauge cardiac workload by measuring how hard the blood is pumping on artery walls. This, of course, is affected by the size and number of discharges and the viscosity of the blood. The final component of moving oxygen is how efficient you can get it into the blood and back out to where you need it. If you find yourself huffing just to make it upstairs, you probably have an oxygen transport problem. When it comes to moving oxygen, there are different problems that, of course, occur. You can look at such chronic conditions as asthma, COPD, um, problem with the alveoli sacs, congenital disease, and the whole 9 yards. Now, the second problem could be the amount of red blood cells in the blood. So you could have somebody that's anemic, and the red blood cells are the primary transporters of oxygen. Now, the final component is how well the oxygen can be offloaded at the cells where it's needed. And this is kind of what we call oxygen uptake. Oxygen uptake is the most commonly used term to describe how oxygen a person can take in and use, commonly expressed as VO2, which is max in milliliters, kilograms, and minutes, and it can be measured in several different ways. Now, Queens College STEP test uses changes in heart rate during a specific workout to estimate your VO2. And other tests use spirometry and measures the chemical differences between the oxygen concentration present in exhaled air compared to that in inspired air. And that's basically kind of the concept of pulse oxes and capnography. Another way of expressing the amount of energy being exerted and thus oxygen being consumed is by the metabolic equivalence, meaning at a cellular level, how much energy is being used and done. So in order, again, to do work, we said we needed oxygen, and the other component is fuel. And fuel in the form of the human body is sugar, and sugar comes in many different forms. By understanding what is occurring inside you to complete a physical task at the fire scene, you can better prepare yourself for those duties. So in order to make energy, and energy in the human body is ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, and that is a fuel source to the cells that is commonly used for short duration tasks, such as lifting a patient. Now, ATP is created from 4 specific sources: carbohydrates, fat, protein, and creatine phosphate. Now, as blood is delivered to the muscles, it carries that glucose, that blood sugar, which can be used to form ATP. As the blood glucose level drops, the body immediately replaces it from the muscles, and then it looks in places such as your digestive system. If there is no glucose in the digestive system, it looks for glycogen. And glycogen is basically leftover glucose from past meals, which is converted to glycogen, and it's stored for later use in the liver and in muscles. Carbohydrates can either be complex or simple. Complex are basically healthier carbohydrates, and they consist of whole wheats, foods, and certain beans and vegetables. Simple ones, found in most junk foods such as candy, are fast-acting, but they're short-lived. They don't last long. Now, fat is stored throughout the body and is a relatively abundant source of energy. With adequate oxygen, fat can actually produce more than 10 times the amount of ATP than the same amount carbohydrates can. Protein, like fats, are also a source of energy in the absence of carbohydrates. Creatine phosphate is the last source for ATP generation, which generally consists of muscle energy reserves created and stored in the muscular and easily produces ADP. Physical activity requires substantial amounts of ATP, which in turn requires replenishment of nourishment. In the first place should occur is, of course, in rehab. So your body needs energy. Where's it going to get it? It's going to get it from what's floating around in the bloodstream, and then of course after that gets used up, it starts looking for the next energy source, and then it starts breaking down muscles. And if it doesn't get there, it's looking in the digestive system. And then if it doesn't get there, then it's kind of looking, in our fat stores. And that's kind of one of the ways if you're one of those no carb or meat only diets or keto diets work, because you're essentially depriving your body of simple and complex carbohydrates, and you're just eating meat products. And this has its own health issues, and I'm not advocating one or another. I'm just kind of explaining how that works. So if your body's just using the protein for energy, once that gets used up, there's no carbs, it's going to start burning those fat cells. And once you burn fat cells, of course, you're losing weight. And when you lose the weight, a lot of it's water weight and things of that nature. Okay, so moving on. Aerobic and anaerobic metabolism. Now, the body works in these two distinct modes, and aerobic metabolism essentially means in the presence of oxygen. An example here listed is running for 30 and 40 minutes and, of course, breathing heavily. Now, anaerobic metabolism is without oxygen. And an example of that would be like heavy resistance training. And when you're looking at your cardiovascular endurance, the more your body can adjust to running anaerobically, the longer it can go, so to speak. But anaerobic metabolism can be bad on the body, because when you're producing energy, your body is going to always need that energy. It's going to keep producing whether it has the oxygen or not. Unfortunately, when you don't have the oxygen present, anaerobic metabolism is less efficient than aerobic metabolism. So it produces a lot of waste. It's not getting the full bang for the buck. It's like an engine running with missing a spark plug, so to speak. Now, another pitfall of anaerobic metabolism is it builds up a lot of waste, and that waste is in the form of excess of hydrogen. And in a nutshell, when you start building up hydrogen in your cells, they tend to start dying off, because hydrogen is basically acid. And the more acid that's in the body, of course, the cells start breaking down, and of course, the cell dies and everything else beginning to die. And a good example of this that you feel is the soreness, so to speak, that lactic acid in your muscles that's built up after you haven't worked out before, you don't stretch good at the end, and it's left in your muscles, so you get that cramping and burning sensation. Now, for quite some time, the fire service has struggled to develop the perfect physical capability test for new hires, as we mentioned a little bit in the last chapter. Now, officially known as a Criterion Test, or CTT, Criterion Test is simply a test that attempts to mimic actual task in a controlled environment, in this case on the firing ground. Now, the Combat Challenge, which is great, something to watch if you've never seen it before, it's on ESPN, Google it. It is a great idea. Now, the Combat Challenge started as a physical agility test in Maryland in 1976. Although it continues on as a CTT, it evolved into a popular competition for existing firefighters in the early 90s. And the components of this challenge include many of the things done on the fire ground, such as high rise pack carry, hose hoist, forcible entry, hose advance, and a victim rescue. Now, we did talk about the Cpap test, and we're going to go into it a little bit more here, but one of the most inclusive forms of the physical agility test is the Cpap, and it was created by using a job analysis and task survey. And it's used by several fire departments in the United States, and it's slowly becoming one of the most popular because it simulates actual firefighting tasks. And again, since it's criterion based, it's hard to argue its validity because that's what you're going to be doing on the job. Now, the Cpap consists of 8 events, and they must be completed successfully, and it's also a timed task. You have a stair climb, a hose drag, an equipment carry, ladder raise and extension, forcible entry, search, rescue drag, and ceiling pull. So let's look at fit for duty versus wellness. Most firefighters are more than willing to partake in a wellness program, one designed as a voluntary program to help make healthy choices in diets and exercise. Fit for duty, however, refers to being able to complete specific skills or meet set criteria to be permitted to work. And one of the biggest problems here is with fit for duty is to find exactly what is fit. In the 2013 edition of NFPA 1582 has now set the minimum number at 12 METs to pass a medical physical. In WFI 3rd edition does not support a minimum standard for fit to duty. It suggests using data to establish norms that are non-punitive in nature, but instead promotes individual improvement. So to kind of sum this up, what they're looking at is what is fit. What is normal for one may not be normal for someone else. Now, some emergency responders believe that fit for duty will eventually become a component of firefighting. Besides the probable reduction of in-line of duty heart attacks and strokes, financial incentives will perhaps drive the change. It is advisable to be proactive in establishing our own standards for fire service professionals. Have done that with 1583 and 1582, and we'll go into this here a little bit more. Now, one of the problems in fit for duty, and we talk about, okay, what about an annual physical agility test to make sure that we can still do the job? Well, some argue that, hey, that's a good thing and that you should take an annual test to make sure that, keeping us honest and that we're keeping up our wellness. And others argue, okay, what do you do with a guy that or a gal that's been on the fire service for say 10 or 15 years and they can't pass a standard, say, agility test or Cpap test? Do you A, send them packing, fire them? B, do you still let them work? But then if they die of a heart attack, is the employer going to be liable because, hey, you knew he wasn't fit for duty because he didn't pass the test? Or do you try to find light duty for them until they get themselves back in shape? And if you have one, what about 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? So there's a lot of controversy here and fight about it, and a double-edged sword. Trying to improve one is going to kind of hurt some stuff on the other side. So looking at 1583, which is a standard for health-related fitness programs for firefighters, describe the necessary components of a health-related fitness program. And I highly encourage you to start one at your department or see if there's one in place. And, reference 1583 as your Bible, if you will, or your coordinating manual. So the components it recommends are a fitness coordinator, a fitness assessment, an exercise training program, education and counseling, and of course data collection. Now both NFPA and WFI require periodic fitness assessments for all members, including an annual assessment in NFPA 1583. Now the 5 components of a fitness evaluation include body composition, aerobic capability or capacity, muscular strength, muscular endurance, and flexibility. The final component includes a process of collecting and maintaining data collections for health-related fitness programs. Individual information is private and includes the following categories of information: personal information, questionnaires, fitness assessment, and program participation data. Of course, if you're going to enact one of these, again, it's going to cost some money from the department. But like I said earlier, aren't firefighters one of the most valuable tools at the fire department or piece of equipment? And why aren't we spending money on this equipment? So NFPA 1582 is a standard on a comprehensive occupational medical program for fire departments, and it outlines the medical components necessary to ensure the health of its personnel. The main components of the standard include a fire department physician, annual medical physicals, and certain special testing situations like hard metals and stuff for cancer and things of that nature. Now, 1582 outlines what specific body systems should be evaluated and what diagnostic tests should be completed. Now, the purpose of these tests is to find the medical problems before they become debilitating. And of course, if we identify any trends going on and be able to fix them. Your annual medical physicals should include such thing as a pulmonary function test, which is one recommended component of the annual diagnostic that some primary care physicians are not capable of doing. And another important component of testing, of course, is blood work analysis. So when we're looking at 1582 and you want to do this annually and you want to do it for the entire department, this can be a really high dollar bill. So of course, a lot of departments shy away from doing it. But again, what's the cost? So do you put money toward your most valuable equipment or do you not? And take your chances. It's like buying a used car, so to speak, and not having an independent mechanic look over it, or buying a home and not having a home inspector go through it to identify the potential problems that could be there and need to be addressed prior to buying it or moving in. And of course, I've been preaching this the whole time. Money is spent to prevent big repairs of equipment and little is spent on personnel. Why? Now, a good way to compare this is, of course, maintenance of our equipment. If you keep up the maintenance on your equipment, such as oil changes, sharpening blades, doing pump testing, hose testing, checking pressures, changing and rotating tires, and all that other stuff, what happens to your equipment? It lasts longer because you're taking care of it. You are changing out fluids, you're keeping stuff clean, you're looking for damage so you can repair it before it becomes a problem. And if you take care of it, that's a whole lot cheaper than replacing it. And if you look at the firefighter, that's true too. Think about all the money that is spent from a department standpoint on hiring a new employee. You've got testing, you've got training, you're buying equipment, all that kind of stuff is invested in this, individual, and of course, salaries and such. And yet, we're not taking care of it. We buy it new, and then we run it into the ground, and then, hey, guess what? After a few years, after it's a clunker, we toss it to the side and we go get another one. And again, long term, it is costing departments more by not taking care of their resources. And there's a whole lot of stuff in this text that we'll talk about that has to directly deal with, of course, health and wellness in terms of taking care of our own. So with any equipment, you look at efficiency. How well is it doing the job? So firefighters can increase efficiency in terms of work rate, movement speed, and intrinsic factors such as muscle fiber composition, fitness level, body composition, and of course technique. So work rate basically refers to, because of the relationship between swings and damage, it's a good example. Accuracy suffers in energy use output, the work component, resulting in reduced efficiency. So what I'm referring to here is like splitting wood or breaking down a door. Um, the more work you do, how effective it becomes diminishes because of your energy use outpaces the work completed, which makes it, of course, less efficient. Movement speed. For every action, there's an optimal speed. Utilizing the exact speed of labor-intense job takes experience. Again, so, it's like running a race. Slow and steady wins the race, or the old adage of the tortoise and the hare. Um, there's a right speed to get things done. And that's kind of like the same concept for gas mileage. You can go faster, but it takes more gas. You can go slower, uses less. And there's a time component in there, and it's a question of finding that sweet spot. Now, our intrinsic factors are those having to do with equipment, such as PPE. And again, the other factors has to do with the own composition of the human body. Such as how efficient your body uses oxygen, making ADP, and things of that nature with the aerobic and anaerobic metabolism. And that is directly proportionate, of course, to the fitness level of the individual, as well as the body composition or makeup. A firefighter with a heavier load to carry will have to deduct the energy needed to move his or her body from energy available for work. So again, imagine if you lost 10 or 20 pounds, how much easier it would be to do your job and how much more energy you have, because your body is used to moving that weight around and having to work harder by, dumping off, that 25-pound weight or whatever. You're going to move faster and you're going to have more pickup, just like a truck pulling a heavy load. And of course, technique. Training is the only way to become proficient at the skills firefighters need to use the tools that you have. The better technique you have, the more efficient you can become, and of course, the less work you're actually doing. So in conclusion, physical demands of emergency response and firefighting have been well documented. It is not uncommon for emergency responders to exceed their physical limitations. Responders must prepare for the anticipated stresses well in advance of an emergency. Emergency responders must ensure that they are ready to respond, which requires medical and physical maintenance followed by annual testing. Firefighters and other emergency responders are at a disadvantage in some ways when it comes to physical health. National organizations include the NVFC, IFC, and IAFF, having recommended standards and training programs to increase the health and fitness levels of their members. Overexertion is responsible for the most firefighter deaths in most years. And again, this goes back to the whole heart attack or stroke. Your body utilizes oxygen and fuel to make energy. Maintaining sufficient oxygen requires a healthy pump to send oxygen-rich blood to the organs and sufficient sized pipes to carry the blood and the ability to load and unload the oxygen. Again, in the pipes, you start looking at cholesterol and plaque buildup. Just like a water main, the more sediment you get in there, the smaller it gets. It increases the pressure, but decreases the volume. And what we need is volume. The use of energy usually results in the production of heat. Oxygen uptake is the body's ability to utilize the oxygen it needs. The fuel needed for metabolism is in the form of ADP and can come from your carbohydrates. Remember, you have simple and complex. Simple is your junk food, gives you a quick burst of energy like a Snickers bar, but it doesn't stay with you, and of course, helps produce more fat. Fat, protein, and creatine phosphate are the others. Your max heart rate can be calculated by subtracting your age from 220. And again, I take it with a grain of salt because people vary so widely between, what is norm for one may not be norm for another. And when we start looking at, our 1582 and whatnot in terms of firefighter rehab, they're going away from set vital signs and heart rates because people are so different, and actually looking at such things as symptoms. What are they looking like? Are they breathing heavy? Are they diaphoretic? Are they pale? And waiting till those signs and symptoms return back to normal before allowing to continue on the job. Now, your physical agility testing is a form of a criterion task test, meaning, again, it mimics what is done on the fire ground. Fit for duty refers to being able to complete specific skills or meet set criteria to be permitted to work. NFPA 1583 describes the necessary components of a health and fitness program. 1582 outlines the medical component, and make sure you guys are familiar in terms of the numbers and which goes to which. Emergency responders should receive preventative maintenance on a regular schedule, and firefighter skills can be improved to increase efficiency. Okay, gang, this is a good overview of the chapter. If you haven't already, again, as always, make sure you read the chapter. Also, in Blackboard this week, there are several links to these NFPA standards, as well as some good videos to watch on Cpap and criterion testing and things of that nature. So, if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call in the office at 706-357-0162, or you can email me at aroberts@athenstech.edu. And until next time, be safe and have a good shift.